speaker's corner, and I suppose having tried to talk to people who are basically in denial and wishing to remain in denial, I have realized the futility of dropping hints when they are, actually willfully blind and willfully deaf. And so I suppose I am a little unpopular because I am more in your face and, going on about idolatry and, the fact that Americans haven't got an official religion, and that may be that is the source of their problems, I think, because not having a religion means that you don't know whether the laws that your legislature passes is good or evil, because you actually don't have a system to say, these are the things we always do and these are the things we never do as, Americans or, British people or whatever. And I think Islam is saying, well, if you believe in God and then you must believe that the Quran is the word of God, and in the Quran there are these rules and laws that we are to follow if we are to be Muslim and live as Muslims and treat each other as fellow Muslims.
Yeah. So, and I'm always trying to. I'm not very good at filtering. Maybe I am, I'm not sure, but I'm always trying to dumb down things because maybe I'm a secondary school teacher. So I feel like what you're saying is that because America and the West generally doesn't seem to actually have a firm religion by which they follow, there's nothing that's clear cut. This is what you
Everything is
should do.
permissible
Yes,
for them.
yes, exactly. Um, so, and as I was discussing with you on WhatsApp, the beginning you cannot. So there's two parts to this conversation. I'm going to split it into two videos. I'm going to attempt to anyway. And the first part, I think, which is essential, is to know God is alive. Not to even academically know God is alive, that logically God must be alive, but God is alive, communicates, and cares. I think those are two kind of aspects that people, even if they've come to the conclusion that God exists, they think either God is not alive or God doesn't care. Does that maybe in any way represent what your position is at the moment?
Well, I know that there have been many religious disputes over the centuries about how we are to conceive of God, um, whether as Trinitarians, Arians, or Jews and Muslims. And I think it is absolutely necessary to believe that a perfectly moral God is alive, knows everything, and is capable of punishing evil and rewarding good in this life and the next, because that's the only thing that would make people, frighten people, speak truth to power. Because if they didn't, then they would think, well, if I say this thing, I'll be cancelled, I'll be burnt at the stake, I'll be tortured, and all sorts of evil things done to me and the people I love.
Right, yes. So, um, yeah, and yes, so you have to know that there is a God who's watching you, and it's not enough to have laws that tell you what you have to do, because you can always believe that you might be able to escape the law, but if you know there's an all-powerful God who's in your mind and watches every thought, that's a whole different level of policing, and that's why I thought this conversation was necessary, because you describe yourself as agnostic at the moment.
Yes, I am agnostic in the sense that I believe that if somebody is determined to believe in the other thing, whether they are atheists or theists, nothing you will say can actually change their minds if they are determined to hold on to their position. And I think many people hold on to their position simply because it's a lifestyle choice. I mean, if you want to be gay all your life, I mean, what's the point of saying, oh, I believe in God? Because that would interfere with your ability to enjoy your sexual liberation. And so most of the time, it's a lifestyle choice. Um, and we pretend to believe in all kinds of things just to be with the mainstream in order not to be cancelled, marginalised, demonised, etc.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, I think there's two reasons, I think. Well, I can think of two reasons why people choose to ignore God or religion or whatever. One is to go with the majority because it's our nature. We feel psychologically people there's psychologically or psychologists know that people prefer to go through pain and be with the big or the majority than stand out because that's even more painful. So it's quite painful for human beings who are naturally social to stand out. So that's one thing. But also the other thing is they fear that they religion restricts their freedom, and they fear that when they lose that freedom they're going to be more unhappy. And what I want to do is politely and slowly and gradually let people come to the realization, which is also kind of becoming more and more evident as Islam grows, that actually the freedom that you want to hold on to do anything is not making you happy because it's reflecting in rising levels of depression that are rocketing in the West. But also, you'll increasingly find the only people that are happy are the Muslims who restrict themselves to God's laws, which are natural laws, as in they're laws based on how you actually function as a human being. If you see yourself as a robot and you've got certain buttons, God tells you which buttons to press. And so they're in this on the surface they look like they're restrictive, but under the cover, when you explore, if you study psychology and things like that, you will find actually they're 100% in line with your happiness. So that's what I want. That's why I want to pick up this topic: is God alive, and attempt to convince you that God is alive today, not just for the sake of. This is what I want to make clear on this video, not for the sake of winning an academic debate, because I personally don't care what anybody thinks. I don't need anybody to agree with me. It's just I genuinely feel pain for people who are not fully grasped the reality of God, because it's the most beautiful thing. It's like when you go to a beach or see some beautiful setting, scenery, I should say, it's you feel that peace. God is a million times more of that experience. Nature is just a reflection of God. So that's the intro. But should we dive into it, like
Yes,
the
please.
evidence? So I've made a few notes. I'll be going through them. Maybe it's the right direction. Maybe we'll see how it goes, see how you respond. But I love the Quran. I see the Quran itself. And so I'm going to give a quote of the Quran, but I see the Quran itself as an extension of nature. Um, so just as according to psychologists, nature is the most powerful antidepressant. Now it's been confirmed, um, and so we have an intrinsic love for nature, or God's creation. The Quran is also God's creation. So let's just see how you feel about this very interesting, a lovely quote from the Holy Quran, according to me at least, about is God alive? And when my servants ask you about me, say I am near. I answer the prayer of the person when he or she prays to me. So they should listen to me and believe in me, that they may follow the right way. So, I mean, what are your thoughts about that? Maybe I should repeat it. I've got it on my screen. Did you grasp at all anything that I just said from there?
I will try to paraphrase it,
Yeah.
and God invites um, Muslims to tell non-Muslims that um, all you have to do is ask, something like that.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of sort of subtle suggestions as to a couple of rules there. And the rules are, in short, that if you are willing to listen to me, God is saying, like, so when non-Muslims ask, or even people who are Muslims but lost their way or whatever, everybody's on a spectrum of their distance from God. Essentially, the first person who's addressed in the Quran is Prophet Muhammad, but then everybody else who's supposed to follow Prophet Muhammad is also addressed. And so it says, if anybody asks you about me, about God, then say God is near. So there's a lot of subtle things suggested just by that. Like God, if God is near, God loves you. So that answers one of the. So it's not that just God is alive, but God cares about you. It's just the wording is beautiful for me. And God is promising that God will respond to you as well. Like, this is a deal. This is like, you, the more you listen to me, the more I listen to you. But in fact, God is so kind because he's the gracious, and that's that word gracious. Again, any Arabic word in the Quran is oversimplified. Gracious means gives abundantly, even if you are disrespectful, don't ask or anything. Like everybody, if you're an atheist or not, you get rain, you get air, you get so many other things. So God guides people whether they ask for it or not. But on top of that, if you ask for it, God will guide you lots more. And just to kind of describe that a bit more, there's a saying of Prophet Muhammad. He says, "Whoever comes," this is a saying, let's say, in God's word. So it says, "Whoever comes close to me by the length of a hand, I will come close to him or her by the length of an arm. Whoever comes close to me by the length of an arm, I'll come close to them by the length of two outstretched arms. And whoever comes to me walking, I will come to them running." So that kind of explains this verse of the Holy Quran a bit more. To the extent that you are a servant of God, or willing to be a servant of God, to willing to listen to God and do good things according to God's rules, the more you will see God showing himself to you in your own life. That will become more and more obvious and evident. What do you think about that?
Yes, it certainly sounds like it could work. But before I forget, I wanted to mention to you that I remember this verse in the Quran that says, God is closer to you than your jugular vein.
That's 100% right. Yeah, that's right.
So, well, it has kind of life-threatening or soul-threatening implications if you don't think like that, because then you might sever yourself from him through actions and thoughts,
Right.
and
Yeah.
deprive yourself of his guidance
Yeah. So
and
there's.
forgiveness.
Yeah, sorry, I feel like I keep interrupting you. I don't mean to. I keep thinking you paused and then. But yeah, that's a really. I never thought of it in quite that way. So when I thought of that verse, God is closer to you than your jugular vein, it was like God is closer to you in nearness and understands you better than you might even know yourself, because your jugular vein is your life artery. Do you know what I mean? So is closer. God is closer to you than life itself, but also God, that interpretation of you should fear God because God is closer to you than your life itself, and could cut off. I think you were suggesting that he could cut off that life artery at any point. Is that what you're suggesting?
Or we could ourselves do it without realizing it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there are also, but I think that's a great verse to point out. Like the nearness, at least, um, is definitely there. You know that God is closer to you than your jugular vein or your life artery. So the other point I wanted to make was that besides, so that's something we have that I want to go through at some point, like talk about how God is that's just a claim so far. It's not really evidence or convincing, but it's just like, just to know that God has put this challenge out. Like, anybody who's searching for me, I'm here to be found. That's one thing. Um, but I want to sort of backtrack. Maybe it's worth mentioning that even though so the summary of my whole argument is going to be in this short like few sentences. It goes something like this: science leaves doubt. So you might think, you might look at the evidence, and I think this is where you've got from our discussions. You might see from you said you believe that there must be a God, but I'm not sure why you say there must be a God. But maybe you looked to the science or something, or some other evidence, and you said there must be a God. But there's always doubt that is left, isn't it? There's evidence, but maybe you have a doubt that your evidence is incomplete. Let me ask you. You said that you believe there must be a God, but you're not sure if the God is alive. Is that right?
Um, no, I say that there's definitely a hypothetical supreme authority, because even atheists will say, I deny God because I deny this concept of the Abrahamic God actually existing. Um, and but my thinking is that an atheist has to first understand what God is before he can deny the existence of God. And I'm saying if we all think of God as a hypothetical supreme authority, then we are actually, yeah, I mean, it's undeniable because atheists already understand the concept of a hypothetical supreme authority. And in a way, if they want to argue that, it's just a story used by people who want to control us, you can say, yes, well, we have to be controlled, don't we? What are laws for but to control us?
So why I'm confused, because when you say there's definitely a hypothetical supreme authority, or to shorten it even more, there's definitely a hypothetical God. It's like the definite and the hypothetical seem to contradict each other. That's why I'm confused. Could you help me with that?
Yes, because I'm saying that an atheist would say, we'll talk about the hypothetical supreme authority because maybe they will reject the idea of God and even the idea of calling God God. So they will say God is a hypothetical supreme authority that theists, in their error believe in, and therefore they have a different lifestyle choice and they miss all the fun that atheists have. Availing themselves of all these sexual encounters and all the things that are considered to be sins by Jews and Muslims. And they feel themselves to be superior to people who are religious, depriving themselves of all these pleasures that these atheists, take for granted and which they regard as a human right.
Okay. To be fair, I'm still confused, but I'm gonna go down certain lines and tell me if there is worth doing. Is it worth demonstrating that scientifically God exists, or have you already come to that conclusion that God logically must exist? Where are you on that?
Well, I'm saying that the idea of God, the concept of God, definitely exists, even in the minds of atheists who want to deny him. And I'm saying that is enough. The fact that there is this idea that so many people want to believe in is enough to create doubt in the minds of atheists.
Right. Just the fact that there are so many people who believe in God is some sort of evidence that God exists. Is that what you're saying? I'm just trying to clarify.
Um, as an agnostic, I never argue with people about whether God exists or doesn't exist. All I say is that belief in God is obviously useful. It is certainly useful to Jews who are still around when, they are infamous for attracting anti-Semitism. And there has been the argument that the existence of Jews itself is evidence, conclusive evidence, in fact, of God, because they were very low status people, they were fleeing slaves, but when they listened to God, they managed to conquer Canaan, establish the kingdom of Israel. And even now, many Jews, many Gentiles complain about them, about Jewish supremacy, why they're still there, making things bad for, the anti-Semite might say that. And I'm saying that this idea of Jews being, in a way, second to God, in their anti-Semitism, because they blame Jews for everything, because that is, in a way, is a kind of proof that
Yes,
or argument in support of the idea that God is protecting Jews, because all things being equal, why would they be still around? Because they have the most restrictive religion, they are the most persecuted peoples in the world, and they are smallest in number, but they're still around.
right. So yeah, I heard two sort of arguments there. One is that um, they've been persecuted so much that, and the fact that they're still surviving, there must be some greater power supporting and protecting them. That's
Mm-hmm,
one. And
mm-hmm,
then the second was that, I'm not sure if I understand the second point, that they make their lives so difficult through their restrictive religion.
mm-hmm.
Therefore, what?
That you expect them to have assimilated already, even if they were not being persecuted.
Right, okay, because their religion is so uncomfortable and horrible, let's just say, to use that word,
Mm-hmm,
um, that they should have given up on it and assimilated into normal behavior of freedom and do whatever you want, sort of thing.
mm-hmm,
So is that
mm-hmm.
okay? Interesting. Yeah,
Yes,
and you
yes.
could make the same claim about Islam. So, for example, how did uh, Islam grow from the most backward, weak nation of its time, the Arabs, um, to take over within a few short years, decades, the greatest empires of the time? So the parallel has been made. It's like the Eskimos, who are equally sort of nomadic and have no particular government or power, take over America and Russia, the two great powers of our times. You know, that's how crazy it is. For, I mean, you can. I mean, could you imagine? I mean, do you see the comparison that Muslims have seem to have the hand of God behind them to be able to do in the past such great revolutionary work, as in take over the two greatest powers, the Persians and the Romans of their time, which is
Mm-hmm.
equivalent to the Eskimos taking over America and Russia in our times? Does that make any sense?
Yes. So that's an excellent analogy, and I see religions as moral systems designed to keep a group in existence and apart from others, thereby allowing the group to retain their identity. And it is religious groups that are the biggest human groups, as well as the most enduring human groups.
Right, yes, yes. And so maybe sort of within what you were saying about the Jewish religion being so restrictive that it should have sort of obliterated itself because it's so restrictive, in a similar way, Islam is looked upon as restrictive, and in many ways it is, sure, but um, and that should have not worked because you're making your life difficult. But in fact, the opposite is being demonstrated today, where it's the only religion that's really growing, um, and the only religion that's surviving the onslaught of, let's say, Western attempts to destroy family and society and things like that. Like Islam is having the opposite effect, even though we're probably you say Jews are the most persecuted, but if you think about the West's most hated, the Western media's most hated religion has got to be Islam. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
despite all the negative press we get, we're growing the fastest. In fact, 9/11, the attacks on the Twin Towers, that was a time when Islam grew even faster. So we had the worst press possible. And by the way, Muslims, I think just about all Muslims are against the 9/11 attacks, I think, from wherever I've looked into the statistics. But
Mhm.
there are some extremist groups that, although they're against it, they see it validated in some ways, but I don't see it valid in any way, just to be
Mhm.
clear. But despite all the incredibly negative media attention Muslims get, we're the fastest growing religion in the world. So it shows
Mhm.
that could be the same argument you give for the God being behind the Jews. It's an equal, maybe even more powerful argument for Islam.
Yes, you were talking about the Romans earlier, and I was reminded of Agrippina, who was a mother of Nero, who was a very bad Roman emperor, and she said to his son, who was worried that the people might not like his policies very much, and she said, "Let them let them hate so long as they fear." Because it is better to be hated and feared than not to be feared at all. I think there was
Mm.
some idea, yeah, something like that anyway. And and it seems to me that Christianity is neither hated nor feared because it is regarded as, I don't know, approving, rubber stamping everything Western governments do. But perhaps that was the purpose of Christianity anyway, or a Protestant Christianity.
Interesting way of looking at it. So I think so. Nero wanted to be feared to maintain his rule. From what you're saying, I'm not an expert on Nero. I know he was a nutter or crazy person, um, but Muslims, I don't think they go out to be feared. Um, it's the fear comes from our negative press. Even the Taliban, who I don't support, um, but there's a famous, I think, Yvonne Ridley. She was a prisoner. She was a reporter who had taken prisoner by the Taliban,
Mhm.
and then she ended up becoming Muslim
Yes,
because
yes.
being captive, because they treated her so well, with so much respect. So I don't think Muslims go out their way to be feared. It's just that we get a lot of negative press because we're the unknown, and the Western media takes advantage of the fact that we're unknown. People don't know much about us and try to fill in the gaps with lots of rubbish. Do you know what I mean? They say, "Oh, look
Mhm.
at these people with big beards. There must be something going wrong there." The big beards
Mhm.
are, or wearing a scarf like your picture shows.
Mhm.
There must be something horrible going on there, and then they fill in the gaps.
Yes, stonings, beheadings, throwing
Yeah,
gays off tall buildings.
right.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, there's that. So let's just see where we go next with this. So, what do you think about? Let's talk about a little bit about science. Um, do you think that it is amazing that our planet? So normally, okay, so our planet is in a circular orbit around the sun. So
Mhm.
if it wasn't, we'd be dead. In fact, and then there's a tilt that enables the seasons, and if we didn't have the tilt of the Earth that enables seasons, and if that didn't happen, we'd be dead. And then there's an invisible. I mean, I'm not going to go on, but there are. If you start, there'll be thousands, even millions of things that need to be done for humans to exist, and the mechanics are so perfectly organized. It requires some sort of intelligence for that to happen. What is your feedback on that? I'm not sure which direction we're going to go in, but I'm just testing what your responses are.
Well, you're making the point that God created the perfect conditions for human life to survive, and even as astronomers try and find planets in the galaxy that they can see capable of sustaining life, they have not. Well, none near, and there may be the idea that we are the only
Oh,
forms of
actually, Islam
intelligence.
doesn't say that, by the way. Islam talks right from the beginning of the Quran. It says Lord of all the world. So, and there's hints that we're going to meet aliens and things like that. But that's a whole
Ah,
different thing.
right,
So
right.
it's not the claim that we're the only ones. It's just the claim that the more you understand nature, the more you come to the realization that there are too many things happening. That there are too many life support systems in position to keep us alive. And those life support systems are so intricate, so amazing, and they're not just left to work. They're kept going in balance with everything else. Maybe I'm over explaining it. It's like there are life support systems that are so complicated that at the very least they require intelligence, and there's more to it, but I won't say any more yet. So
Mhm, mhm.
do you accept, or how do you feel about the idea that there must be an intelligent creator who's keeping us alive?
I accept these arguments, but I was just going to make one that if we are the only intelligent life form in the entire universe, we could ask, well, because we know of the vastness of the universe, and if God indeed created us as the only life form, then why did He do that? And that could be another argument for, well, He just wanted to impress us.
Sure. So I think one of the problems in our age, as it were, this time that we're living through, is that there's a great misunderstanding of God. The fundamentals are just wrong. So I can answer that, like the why, even though that's not what I'm trying not to go into. The why is God creates beauty, and the greatest beauty is not in physical form, but it's inner form. So what I mean by that is like more beautiful than, let's say, an animal. When you look at it, it looks amazing just by its outer appearance. More beautiful than that is a human being sacrificing their needs for other people. Do you know what I mean? There's the attributes that are more beautiful than just appearances, outer appearances. And God has set a trajectory, let's say, where human beings have been put on Earth, where the beginning of that journey is just Earth, where they learn to become more and more beautiful by the end of life on Earth, but that doesn't end there. It continues into infinity in heaven or hell, whatever. So this is just, I'm trying to give you sort of a rough idea of the plan of God. So it doesn't end with life on Earth. It continues in heaven, and everybody who goes to hell, which is something that's a whole different topic, will eventually leave hell, because all hell is what's that word when people go a rehab? Do you know what I mean? So it's temporary. So basically for everybody the trajectory is to become more and more beautiful. I don't know if that helps at all in understanding what's going on. It's not just a game, it's not a stupid thing that God thought of doing. God has a beautiful plan that's not really be within our ability to fully understand, but we have an inkling of an idea.
Um, okay, my understanding of I'm afraid I have to use this terrible word, the utility of religion,
Yeah.
is that these rules are made to make us behave better towards each other for the benefit of the group, because all these rules are meant to regulate our behavior towards, our fellow Muslims, our fellow Britons, whatever, so that we as a nation or as a religious group will remain in existence and prosper, become bigger, but we have to remain in existence. And that is the utilitarian reason for us restraining our appetites and our urges in being mean to each other, for the benefit of the group.
So that is the secondary, or the secondary or even tertiary or whatever feedback as to whether you are doing the right thing or not. The number one reason is the infinite journey towards God, as it were, towards beauty. And then you know if you're doing wrong or right, because ugliness comes out of doing wrong and beauty comes out of doing right. So this life on earth is only temporary. So Islam is not just to make stable societies. Stable societies are a result of living a beautiful life. Good is a result of living a beautiful life. So God, it wouldn't make sense for God to create something. From our perspective, life on earth seems to a long time, but in terms of the greater length of the universe and things like that, it's only a blip in time. It's only a fraction or a millisecond in time, right? So it wouldn't make sense for God to create something, us human beings and all the other creation surrounding us in our ecosystem, just for the purpose of having a stable society which would eventually be obliterated anyway. Do you get it? So it's not actually the main reason. It looks like a good reason from our short-term perspective, but that's not the real reason. So there's, just to clarify, so what is Islam? Islam means peace, but what kind of peace? It means peace with yourself, peace with your environment, and peace with God. Number one peace is with God, and all the others ones are sort of feedback mechanisms to tell you that you're doing the right thing. I don't know how confusing that was.
I suppose I can try to paraphrase that by saying that our emotions are a way of telling us if our reason is working. So if we're feeling unhappy, it might make us think, well, what am I doing that is making me unhappy? Did I do something wrong? Or was it because people were being mean to me? And if people are being mean to me, were they right to be mean to me because I've done nothing wrong? Or, they're mean to me because I've done something wrong? Or it's some sort of misunderstanding. And therefore, we are meant to work out what it is that is causing us emotional distress.
Yes, so there's that feedback, there's the inner struggle with your conscience, and there's outer results of bad relationships and things if you do something wrong. And so all those things are geared towards you getting feedback and telling you you should be a better person. But the purpose of a better person, becoming a better person, is to actually become a more beautiful person, and that's where the real journey is. So there's the main journey, which is beauty towards beauty, which is God. And I think that's self-evident in a way that God is beautiful if he's the creator of nature, which we are naturally attracted to. But everything else is just feedback, but it's good feedback.
I think what I understand you to be saying is that if God is perfect and we know ourselves to be imperfect, if we are being rational, honest and good, we would try to be better in order to make our way towards that perfection that we know we may never reach, but it is nevertheless worth our energy and effort in trying.
Yeah, you cannot reach, let's say, something which God is infinitely perfect, and we are on an infinite journey towards beauty. We're not supposed to. We might. I can't say. We can get closer to God, but we don't necessarily have to reach it, because becoming more beautiful is better than not becoming more beautiful, I suppose. So
A
yeah,
journey of 1,000 miles begins with one little step.
yeah, that. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So I think we're just going to go with the flow, because I think I misunderstood some of your messages on WhatsApp about where your belief is. So I think it's just like a to and fro about. Yeah.
Yes, maybe I should clarify. I mean, what I understood to be. I mentioned this debate I had 12 years ago with a Muslim it was, who is right? Does God exist? Something like that. And he was making the point that it is obvious God exists because we are here, because there has been a creation, and because there was a creation, that creator was God, and there must have been a creator, and that creator was God. That was his chain of reasoning, and I felt that the only way to get out of that is to deny the Abrahamic God was to say that, well, yes, God may have created the universe, but he may not be listening, or he doesn't care about us, or he may be dead.
Right. So that's actually what I was thinking you were saying. So that's why I quoted that verse of the Holy Quran about the
Mm-hmm.
challenge that God gives. It says, "If you want to know me, just ask," basically. But you have to the you're more likely to you're going to get a better response the more you listen to God, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is a reasonable deal.
Uh,
Yeah.
yes. And I suppose I mentioned that because you may know what Nietzsche said about in one of his books. I think "Thus Spake Zarathustra," and it was to the effect of God is dead. That was what Nietzsche said.
Right. Okay, so I gave one sort of, let's say, challenge that God gives himself, that God will listen to you if you ask. But that's just something in the background to bear in mind. But what else are there evidences of in terms of God's existence, and not only existence, God still talking to us? And there's plenty of that. So one other thought I want to show is God cares, in the sense that God has sent us love letters. Okay, what are those love letters? That is the Quran and many other messages, and those messages have been rubber stamped, as it were, with the signs of the Creator by demonstrating He is the Creator, by saying things like, "Oh, in the Quran it talks about the Big Bang," when hundreds of years or even a millennia ahead of its time. So so why do I call the Quran a love letter? So you got one thing, you got the rubber stamp that this is from God. It's not just the Big Bang. In just one verse, it talks about two things that we've only learned of recently. There's the Big Bang. The Quran says the whole universe was a closed-up mass, and we expanded it. And even before that, it says, very interesting. It says, "Do not the disbelievers see?" It's like challenging the people who disbelieve in God, that this fact that the Big Bang exists. And then it follows it up with another miraculous statement, which is every living thing was made out of water, which is when we look for life on Mars or other planets, what do we look for? Do you know?
Water.
Right. Okay. So there's just the rubber stamp. But let's rewind and say, why is it a love letter? Because every chapter of the Holy Quran starts with, "I am God," and so Allah, which means a perfect God, okay, and who's the most giving. Again, these are very short summaries of what these words mean, but most giving, as in, I give you air, I give you water, I give you tons and tons of stuff without you asking. And on top of that, I encourage you. So the short verse, the version of the first verse of the Holy Quran, and the first verse of every chapter is, "I am Allah, the most gracious, the merciful." But those are really terrible summaries. It's more like, "I am God, the most perfect, who gives you tons and tons of stuff for without you asking. And on top of that, I give you so much more for using the abilities that I've given you, and I reward you and I encourage you. It's like and those two words to give you more of an understanding of what these attributes are. They're linked to the word womb, like the mother's womb. You are living, we are living in God's womb right now. We are given all. Do you understand? Does that in any way connect? Like, we're given all the things we need within the womb, which is Earth and the universe we live in, and then we're giving all the things we need to progress as well, according to our faculties. I'm not sure how confusing what I'm saying is.
May I try to paraphrase what
Yeah.
I thought you said? Actually, when you were talking, I was reminded of a conversation that I had with a Christian, actually, but he seemed to be saying that the act of creation was a loving act.
Yes.
Oh,
Right.
and that was enough for this Christian man who was talking about Genesis,
Okay.
the book of Genesis, and I suppose the fact that we are here and we I think we have the tools with which to make the correction, but I think our egos prevent us from availing ourselves of the instruments to hand to stop our suffering, and before that I was reminded of this belief in Judaism, and it's to the effect that before the disease the cure exists, and I think this means that God thoughtfully corrected the cure, provided the cure before the disease even arrived. And, it's our own fault if we don't know, if we won't use it, because we are too proud or.
Yeah, we didn't use our God-given abilities to come or see the cure that God would have made evident if we used our abilities. Yeah.
And we are
Yeah.
frequently exhorted to use our reason in the Quran, are we not?
Yeah, and God doesn't make these things, cures, etc., out of our reach. They're well within our reach if we use the abilities we're given. So I suppose I'd clarify that. So let me see. So does God care? God say so. God, to summarize what I'm trying to say is, it's like, if there is a God that does care, then they would to be communicating to us in a loving way, ways in which our lives will be better. And so that's the Quran, and that's not the only way, but this is just my starting point. And what makes it a love letter? God tells you how much he loves us by saying the beginning of every chapter what he is already doing for us. So it's not like the Christian who said this is just an act of love and that was enough for him. It's more than, it goes to more detail. It says this act of love is what? Like, I gave you air, I gave you water, I gave you so many things. Just reflect on that. Just think about it. Like they say, if you want to be happy, just count your blessings. Like,
Yes.
people, when you don't reflect on it, then you won't really appreciate. But when you start just counting them, then you start appreciating them. So you have to reflect on these things, not just hear them. That's one thing. But then you can see that as you delve in things like psychology, we're actually encouraged to be better people. So there's dopamine, right? The main way in which we find happiness through things like dopamine is actually by going towards the target, never mind achieving it. Achieving it is not really the purpose. And a good target, by the way. So it's really interesting. Psychologists have told us that we have to pick a target, and that target has to be good. And then the mechanisms in our body, like dopamine, these are kind of happiness chemicals, push us, that's where you get the dopamine, not even for achieving things. So you said that we were talking about earlier about never achieving oneness with God. That's not the point. God wants us to go on the journey, and So, so what I'm, if I to go back to this verse of the Holy Quran, it's not an empty claim. The claim that God rewards us is demonstrated in the science that we know, the science of psychology, for example.
Yes, when we talk about a morally perfect God, I think we mean a God that will dispense perfect justice, which is what all of us want ever since we were children, being told fairy stories when, it ends badly for the villains and it ends well for the heroes. And then they, live happily ever after. And I don't think this desire ends in adulthood. And that's why atheists call people who believe in God people who believe in a magic sky fairy. That's one of the terms they like to call God,
Yeah.
and to deride people who believe in God as mere children who can't get over the fact that they're no longer children, and believe in silly things that can't possibly be true.
Okay, so that's what we call propaganda, because the reality is so the exact opposite. Like, scientifically, we have to believe in God because there are too many things at play for us to exist. It's, I tried to explain it, but
Mhm.
maybe in an overly complicated mathematical way last time. But if you simply do a bit of maths, the probabilities show that there must be a God because it's too impossible for God not to exist. So these people who, or these atheists who are scientists or using the fact that they're scientists to trick people, is that's just propaganda. It's completely the opposite of reality. Uh,
But
yeah.
but what about philosophers? There's this term called theodicy, which means the problem of evil. So a lot of people say, because the world is so evil, we don't believe in a benign God because he allows these terrible things to happen, and therefore he can't exist. What
Okay.
do you say to that?
So that's the old question of why is there suffering, isn't it? Is that what you
Hmm.
mean? Right? And so, again, this is explained in this just one verse of the Holy Quran, which is suffering is a way of looking at something. So I'll give you an example. So there's pain which you physically feel. Okay, let me rewind actually because I want to go to so the verse of the Holy Quran says, besides God being, okay, I'm going to go through the three parts of this one verse of the Holy Quran. There's three parts. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the, I begin with the name of the perfect God, who's the most gracious and the most merciful. Number one. So when you have people like Stephen Fry, he famously is on video, and people like Richard Dawkins say, even if God exists, I would stand up to God and wag my finger and tell him how terrible he is. First of all, that's not going to happen because we're talking about the most powerful or knowledgeable God. So first of all, you're not going to stand up to God when you meet God. That's a ridiculous fairy tale in itself, right? So have some humility, and sort of get with the program. That's a sort of a wake up call. Like, you're not going to do that. Stop lying to yourself that there isn't a God, right? That's the first most important thing to get you in the right mindset to start thinking about what's happening in the question of suffering. Can I just pause at that? Does that make any sense? That you need to, if there's a sort of a petulant child, a person who thinks he can get away with being naughty, and that's what atheists are basically are, right? And I was an atheist myself at one point, right? You need to be snapped out of that first and realize that
Hmm.
actually you're not going to stand up to God, the most powerful and the most, and God almost, mathematically or by all reason must exist. So do you see that that must be a first step of reasoning before you even explain why there is suffering?
Um, yes, I mean, when you were talking, I was reminded of this other person that I know who said that if I ever met God, I'd punch him in the face. it's that kind of infantile comments that atheists have. I assume that they think it's safe to say it because they don't think God exists, because it's just, a fantasy in the
Right.
mind of theists.
So so great. So first of all, you need to snap out of this silly idea that you're going to stand up to God, because you're not, or you're not going to stand up to the all-powerful. And sort of God, the existence of God is self-evident also, just like when you see the computer where you're talking through, it had a creator, even though you didn't see it being created. But the other point of being perfect, that is, because that's the word what Allah means. Allah means the perfect God. He is also all knowledgeable. So just because you don't get the plan, or you don't understand suffering, which I'm going to explain, by the way, and which God does explain, okay, to begin with, realize, which also, again, have some humility, atheists, etc., and all of us, I suppose, that even if you don't get the plan, if God is all powerful and He did it, He probably has a better plan and better understand.
God is the best of planners
Best
and
of planners,
deceivers.
exactly right. And deceivers, I'm not sure about that, but that's another thing. Um, uh, so God is the best of planners is a sort of paraphrasing, is a verse of the Holy Quran for those who don't know. So it's like God knows something that you don't, and you don't have to fully understand it to begin with. So just to stand up to God and say, I know better, with my minuscule, tiny, ant-sized brain compared to God's, it's a bit stupid, really quite stupid. So that's just the beginning sort of setup for the answer. Then we go to, you said, why is there so much suffering in the world? And again, that's wrong. The question itself is completely wrong, because God, next, after saying He is Allah, which is the perfect God, He says, I am the most giving. So the most gracious is the brief translation. And then you reflect on that, you go, oh gosh, God's given me so many things, given me water, air, friends to talk to, infinite amount of things, this beautiful earth with so many places to go, right? And then the atheists love to paint this picture that life is terrible, which is a false and it's a massive lie. So that's the next problem. Even before answering the question of suffering is dismantling the question itself. So does that so I haven't even answered the question yet about why is there suffering, but it needs to be said because there's so much wrong with the question. Do you understand that there's something wrong with the question when there's so much beauty around us?
I suppose that, yes. So the focusing on the negative, obviously, when they say that, because if life really was so terrible, then they would have killed themselves before even asking the question. So
Right.
there must be something in their lives they find worth living for, even
Right.
if they do not attribute it to God.
That's a really strong argument. Yes, thank you. Okay, and then finally, why is there suffering? And that the simple answer is, in reality, if you're following God's way, there would be no suffering. And that comes from this word Rahim, which means the one who rewards. But let me explain that go backtrack and explain that in a little bit more detail. Let's say there's two people studying to become doctors. Okay, one is studying to become a doctor just to be famous, and the other one is actually studying to become a doctor to help people. So the studying can be an absolute misery because they have to study so much. But for the person who is studying to become a better doctor, to actually help people, every second of that learning is a beautiful experience towards becoming a better doctor. But the person who is doing it just for, being a proud doctor or something, every moment of that process is hell. One is going through paradise, okay, through heaven, through that learning process, and the other is going through hell through that same learning process, that same experience, right? So do you see that suffering is a perspective, first of all?
Yes. Obviously, the person who enjoys the study of medicine will be happy studying medicine, even if he doesn't become famous and enjoy his life anyway. While the person doing it for the purpose of being famous is only sees it as a means to an end and doesn't take pleasure in it. So he would have suffering, but I suppose a lot of people would say that there is genuine suffering, genuine injustice, which God, if He exists, permits.
Right, and in many ways that's wrong as well, which it might sound strange, but been fed so much propaganda that we've seen things almost upside down. So I'll give you an example. They love to show pictures of people in Africa, the crying baby in Africa, and everybody in Africa is having a miserable time. Whenever I've gone, the one time I've been to Africa, I found them far happier, and all the videos and whatever and studies, whatever I've looked into, those people are far happier with far less than what I see in the West. So we sometimes say, what about those people in Africa? What about this person? What about that person? What about even the people in the Turkish Syrian earthquake that just took place? Their perspective is very different from ours. Many of them said this is God's will, and they accepted it and they learnt from it, right? But some people don't. The point is that we've been fed a lot of negative propaganda to make it look as if the world is terrible and that everything is suffering. But actually, the things that we think is suffering or pain is actually often the opposite. Having the lack of food makes you much healthier of a lot of the time, right? But then you might say, okay, there's a point at which there is only suffering, like the person dying to death and there's no comeback and there's no lessons to be learnt, right? But that's kind of the last category that I want to talk about. But do you see that the world is being painted in a way that's opposite to reality? I mean, I don't know what your perspective is, but I've seen a lot of the poorest people are the most happy people, and the richest people are the most miserable. What's your thoughts about that?
Um, well, I would, I mean, probably that there's about equal amount of suffering and pleasure, but we don't know. How would we know? Because there is no objective way of measuring, units of suffering and units of pleasure. I suppose to answer that question, if that would be asked of me, would be that our life is an examination hall. And if we pass the test, we go to the better place. And if we don't, we go to the worst place. And that is the bargain, basically.
I think that's an insulting way of, even though religious people give that argument that this universe is a test or this life is a test, it's actually insulting to God, because that makes God sadistic. It means like God has set these hurdles, these random hurdles without real purpose, and if you pass them, God will let you into the gates of heaven, and if you don't, you get thrown into hell. So
It is a Jewish view, I believe, because the Jews believe Satan to be God's prosecuting counsel. And he was a creation of God, I guess, enticing us, being agent provocateur to entice us into evil, probably because he only wants a certain number of people in heaven because, well, he doesn't want hoi polloi getting in.
No, so I would say a lot of the Muslims fall for this simplistic explanation as well. So it's not really, and I think over the years many Jews would have, but I don't think when I talk to Jews, sometimes they are a lot closer to Islam than we realize. So I'm not sure if that understanding of whatever you've described as a Jewish
It's a story.
teaching.
It's a book of Job. It's all there in the book of Job.
Right. Okay.
God and Satan planning how they're going to make Job suffer, because Satan was saying, I bet he wouldn't, bless you and pray, send, be such a good man if he didn't get anything he wanted. And God said, all right, the bet's on. We're going to test Job.
Right. Okay. Cool. So that's the let's say the Jewish point of view, and maybe even the Christian point of view, because the Book of Job is from the Bible, right? I'm quite sure. Yeah. So
It's not in the Quran, the Book of Job. I mean,
no,
story
so
of
the
Job.
Quran is the story of Job, but it's very very different. The Bible's versions or understanding or of the prophets of God is so insulting that we don't even go near it. It's basically um, makes them to do incredibly stupid things like give away their daughters to strangers, homosexuals, whatever, all sorts of horrible ideas about how they commit all sorts of sins that we don't believe in the Bible as it exists at the moment. So yeah, so no, there's no Book of Job. There is a story of Job, but it'll be very different. I think I'm not sure, but it would definitely be very different to what you might see in the Bible.
Hmm.
So there is a point at which there is, let's say, actual death. So I've talked about these different stages, right? I said, first of all, it's a lie that life is terrible. It can be terrible, only to the extent that, for example, really rich people feel suicidal. In the West, the the, the most popular way to die for young people, if that's the wrong word, is suicide, right?
Hmm.
So it's not what you have, but your perspective. And if your perspective is there's no point, then life becomes too terrible to live, at which point you kill yourself. So it's not the stuff. And then you go to the people who so the second stage I went through was people say, oh, you know, poor African people, poor those, whatever, XYZ, poor people. And my experience is they're much happier. And there's a logical reason why they're much happier. And I'll give you a quick example. When I went to Gambia, I was walking down the street, and I was wondering why was everybody lining the sides of the streets against the walls rather than in their homes. And my brother, who was teaching there for a year, he said because they don't have TVs. So they're too poor to have Netflix, for example, and TVs. And so the result is that they talk to each other and they're very happy. They're all smiling. So you said there's no objective way of seeing how happy people are or how much suffering people have. Maybe if you could count the number of smiles, that's a fairly objective way.
Hmm.
And so do you see that we're social beings, and being poor actually has an advantage that we don't do stupid things with our money, like spend all our time alone with Netflix instead of talking to our neighbors. Do you see the argument there?
Absolutely, because we are social animals, and we should, make connections because, well, it makes other people happy as well as ourselves happy by being good neighbors and that sort of thing.
Right, yeah, and that's borne out in psychological literature. For example, they did an experiment with where they said if you had a choice and you were to buy, you were given £5, whatever, I can't remember, it was $5 or something, and you could buy a coffee for somebody else or buy a coffee for yourself, you're far happier buying coffee for other people. So that's inbuilt into you that we're social and we want to do good things with other people and do things with other people, etc. So that's that. But then finally, there's when you actually die, and you say, well, what can you learn when you actually die from hunger and whatever, whatever? Okay, again, it follows the same rule that if you know why, there are literally, so Muslims is, if you look into Islamic history and even now, Muslims are people who are religious, who live their whole lives in the cause of God. They see, and they literally say this when they die, we have succeeded on their last breath. So if that is your purpose, you will, even the death itself is success. But for like the rest of life, if you don't have any purpose, doesn't matter if you've got loads of things, if you're a millionaire or you're whatever in between or you're dying, every single point of that is a misery, is hell, when you don't know your purpose, when you don't know God. I don't know if that makes much sense.
I'm reminded of an article in The Guardian, which was about people on their deathbeds and the things that they might regret. And there is a usual list about wishing they'd been more, spoken their minds a bit more often, spent more time with their family. I forget what the other ones are, but I think it's telling, really. It's like, well, if only I could, I said such and such to whoever, because perhaps they felt it would have done some good just by saying what you felt to be the truth. But for some reason, you held back because you were afraid of something else.
Yeah, so I think the three main things from that study was, one was spend more time with friends, spend more time with family. Another one was spend less time at work. So I suppose they all go together. And that's the regret side. If you don't live your life well, you regret it. And if you live your life well, when you die, you'll be happy you made it through.
Yeah, so like, well, I did all I could,
Yeah.
I have no regrets, because there's a song too about that, isn't it? Je ne regrette rien.
I don't know it. Maybe you have to WhatsApp it to me
I
later.
think that's Billie Holiday.
Oh, Billie Holiday. Okay.
Something like that. It's a note song.
Oh, okay, cool. So I'm talking to you, but as a school teacher, I'm not feeling that. I'm not sure if I feel like, or maybe I'm just too difficult myself. I feel like you haven't really agreed or understood or accepted where I'm coming from about this idea that there is no suffering. That if you go with the third part of this verse, which is Rahim, which means the rewarder, who encourages you to be a better person, and if you follow that line, you are successful. And if you're not following that line, even that is a sort of reward, where when you know your life is going wrong and you suffer, because the end goal is so much greater. So the end goal is for you to become an incredibly beautiful person beyond your, not person or a soul, because this person shell is only a temporary for this life, but there's an infinite journey. So a beautiful soul. And so that suffering even itself is a reward, so you at least know when you're doing something wrong. Maybe these ideas are
I think you're saying that suffering brings with it the rewards of knowledge and wisdom. I think that is what you're saying, and I was reminded, sorry to be Jewish again, but I know that Jews are supposed to thank God even for misfortune.
Yeah, and it's very much like in Islam. There's a saying of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who said, everything that happens to a Muslim is for their good. If something good happens to them in the simple, I'm paraphrasing, but in the simple ways, they're grateful for it. And if something bad happens, they learn from it. So Islam and Judaism is very similar in teachings. It's just the only differences are the corruptions in the Bible, etc., or the Torah.
Yes, there is a verse in the Koran that says, even what you dislike may be good for you. And I think it also extends to wives, even wives that you dislike.
That's
may
the
be
one.
Good for you. Yes.
Yeah. Yes, and then if it's worth explaining that particular verse, the Prophet Muhammad described women as ribs. Basically, their nature is more solid in terms of they have a bend in their personality, which is less flexible, let's say, than men. But that lack of flexibility has its own charm and beauty. It's like they naturally are women, let's say. They naturally do things. I don't know. I'm not sure. But I get it internally. I'm not sure if you get it as a woman.
Okay, my take on it is that the male urge to have sex with women is so strong that it is possible that somebody thought the only way to stop them losing themselves in their appetites and sexual urges is to make them believe in God, because its sexual liberation will lead to men destroying what is good of their civilization if they do not regulate their sexual urges. And the only way of even supporting marriage from generation to generation is to believe in God and to obey the laws of God as regards marriage and the prohibition of extramarital sex.
No, I don't think that's really. I didn't feel that's not the way I've been taught. Yeah, there's always a. So there's two ways in which a woman is a rib, and this is again, we shouldn't stick to the corrupted ideas in the Bible, which is Eve was created out of the rib of Adam. It's supposed to be metaphorical. And what are the two beautiful things about that particular teaching is it's supposed to be, it's got two metaphors. That's not how I was taught, and I think it's far more beautiful. And the two metaphors are women guard the heart of man, so they guard emotions. So men are kind of brutal and they don't even take care of their emotions, but women take care of the emotional side of both men and women. That's one thing. But also women are like a rib in the sense that they have a bend, or they have a fixed, more fixed nature. And Prophet Muhammad said if you bend it you might break it. So they have, like, if you try to, it says don't force women to do, don't try to push women to do something they really don't want to, because you might break them, as it were. Like there's a lot of sayings of Prophet Muhammad on that kind of nature, like treating women like crystal. There's like a woman, I don't know if you know the story about, there's a woman traveling on a camel, I think it was, and the camel was walking too roughly because the person who was pulling the strings of the camel was pulling it too fast, and he said mind the crystal, as in like the glass that's very fragile but beautiful.
Yes.
So mind the crystal, as in drive that camel carefully. So women are supposed to be seen as delicate creatures who are beautiful by their very nature, be treated with care, including not telling them to do things that they really feel uncomfortable with. So for example, I'm trying to think of a good example, but generally with my wife, for example, my wife will say, this is how I'm going to cook the food or something, and then, but I might not like that food, or this is how things are going to be done, and I don't really argue with that because she does things really well in the house. And over time I've got to appreciate it. So I'll give you an example, maybe it's a silly example, I don't know. In Arab culture, because my wife's Arab, she would say, every time she's talking to the kids, she would say any sentence or instruction and then end the sentence with mama, which I found really annoying from my Pakistani culture because we don't do that. And then grandmother would say tete, which means grandmother, at the end of her. So my mother-in-law from my wife's side would say the same sort of thing. And so it sounded really stupid, and she had to do it. She couldn't let go of this habit that she was brought up with. But then over time, I've got to see it as a very endearing way of giving instruction. So basically it kind of means, I'm your mother, please listen to me. And then if your grandmother says it, please, here's an instruction, I'm your grandmother, please listen to me. And it's also a way of getting the kids to memorize, like when they're really young, who mama is and who grandmother is, and etc. So there's like, what I mean to say is that women are brought up, whichever culture in there, with a much more firm, fixed nature, and don't work or fight against it because there's hidden beauty in it. That's how I understood it. I think that's a far more beautiful way of explaining it than that if you mess with women, they're not going to give you sex and that's going to be the end of humanity or something. I think that's a bit more, not as beautiful.
No, I suppose I do see these things in utilitarian terms, and I was going to say, if men make women unhappy, it will, boomerang back on them.
Yeah.
And therefore you don't make your wife unhappy because she'll make you unhappy because, you live with her. And if she's not happy, you're going to feel it. And as would a wife with a husband who is not happy with her. And therefore, if you love each other, then obviously you'll want to make each other happy just because you love them. But even if you don't, it's just a good idea not to, antagonize your spouse.
Yeah, I think I like make them happy because you love them, and relationships work out better. And then there is the other thing about don't annoy people because you wind them up and relationships won't be so good. I'm trying to. By the way, I think the nature of our conversations, and maybe this is just the way it is. I was intending to have half an hour just
I
on,
know.
and now we've done 1.5 hours without even feeling it. So I'm not sure if you're feeling it.
I don't feel it at all. I enjoy our
Brilliant,
conversations very much. But
brilliant.
you may be interested to know there are questions for you in the chat,
Oh, good.
or comments that
Yes,
you
please. Let's go with that. So
can you
another
read
question.
them from
Oh,
your end?
okay. Let me see if I can. I can't see.
They're
Oh,
slightly more intelligent than the ones in our last stream.
where would I? Oh, okay. Maybe it's no. Is it in here? No. Can't. Can you post
Yes,
them?
I'll
Because I
read them
can't.
to you.
Okay. Yes.
Um, they're the usual
Even the
comments about
insulting ones are
9/11,
fine.
and one saying, does Islam condone political violence?
No. I mean, I'm happy to answer the insulting one because I think I value even any interaction because in Islamic history, the people who even wanted to kill Muslims become some of the greatest Muslims. So I'm always very optimistic. So I'm happy to take insults as well. I don't feel it at all. Just as a don't filter, but you
Okay.
can filter if you want. It's up to you.
All right, I won't hold back then.
Yeah.
So Elliot Blatt says, remember 9/11.
Okay.
And Neutrino says, sounds a bit like some
So I'll
dark
take.
night of the soul stuff.
Okay, so I'll take one at a time. So remember 9/11. So interestingly, as I said earlier on, I'm quite sure I said it earlier on, many people became Muslim after they were intrigued by 9/11. Why? It's not because they liked the terrorist attack. What they realized, what Muslims were not like that, and I think that's telling by itself. They knew Muslims, and I thought, hang on a minute, they don't seem to be blowing themselves up. If anything, they seem to be the nicest people we know. My neighbors say we're the nicest neighbors they've ever had, right? And it's not by accident. It's not just because we smile, because we give them Christmas presents. We give the whole street Christmas presents. We give the whole street Eid presents. We've got lovely relationships with our Jewish neighbors. First of all, he gives us Ramadan presents, and we give him Hanukkah presents, whatever. And you won't see anybody else do anything close to that, right? So the point is that 9/11 has got nothing to do with Islam, and most people realize, so many people realize that, to the extent that never mind Islam growing already quickly, it accelerated that because it was such a lie and has nothing to do with Islam. So the only, just to explain it a bit more, people misunderstand the word jihad, and the reason why they misunderstand it is not because of Muslims, but because of false Western propaganda. Jihad means to.
Struggle.
So you were saying?
Struggle, sorry.
To struggle, right? Yeah.
Yes.
But Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said there are two. The small jihad is to have a defensive war, only a defensive war, not even a war, right? And the greater jihad is to work on yourself. And the greater jihad, he said, is after when coming back from the war. He said the greater you're about to face the greater jihad, which is to improve yourself, become a better human being. And so the definition of jihad in the Quran is the only thing that counts as jihad is when they stop you from praying even. So you can't even just have a war, even a normal war, like even, and this might be really controversial, the fight in Palestine of the Zionists versus Palestinians, that's not even jihad, because jihad is only when you're protecting a place of worship. And interestingly, just to finish off the question, maybe to some, the definition of jihad in terms of protecting place of worship starts with, I can't remember which place of worship, but not the mosque. It says protecting a church, protecting a synagogue, protecting any other place of worship, and finally protecting a mosque. That is jihad. No, protecting, people from the right to worship. So, for example, if you protect a synagogue and you die protecting a synagogue, that is jihad. And if and then you would be a martyr. So that gives some idea of what a jihad is. And how wrong 9/11 is. So, any other questions or any
Um,
thoughts on that?
um, well, I suppose 9/11 is would make or should make people read the Quran and take an interest in politics and Western foreign policy. So I suppose that would be the silver lining in
And
that.
I mean, I think most, I don't think this is even controversial now, but 9/11 was an inside job. I'm not I don't think that's even controversial anymore. The idea that the most powerful, the greatest superpower, America, couldn't defend itself against two slow incoming planes, with traffic control probably telling them way before those planes were off course. The idea is so ridiculous that it was actually a terrorist attack. If they are the world superpower, you would imagine they can defend against supersonic rockets. Never mind incredibly slow aeroplanes. I mean, is that ridiculous thing to say that 9/11 was an inside job?
Well, I'm aware of that story, but I suppose even if it were um, caused by Muslims, the fact is that and Bin Laden apparently masterminded it. I mean, it means that Muslims have a problem with U.S. foreign policy, and maybe Americans and Westerners ought to ask why they might have a problem with Western imperialism. So
So
yeah,
yeah,
either way is
go on.
fine by me.
Yeah. So yeah. I don't know if it's. I'll probably want to go to the next question, but most Muslims are against what happened in 9/11, and as I think I said earlier in this conversation, some Muslims say it is justified because of all the mass murders of Westerners in their countries, that they should expect some sort of retribution, but I don't think that's justified. There are better ways to make, two wrongs don't make a right sort of thing. But anyway, any
And
others?
if it was indeed an inside job, then Muslims are off the hook. I mean, I think the people who, they're pretty mixed about it, yes.
Yeah. Any others?
Um,
Comments?
Hold on. Violent people condone violence, often in the name of their religion. I don't believe Islam has a monopoly on such behavior. That's only a comment. Next question by Neutrino. God remains dead and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderer of all murderers? He continues, what was the holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has led us to death under our knives? Who will wipe this blood off us? This is the quote from Nietzsche.
Right. So I think from my limited. Okay, first of all, every comment is really valuable to me. So there was a comment which is. What was a comment before the Nietzsche comment? We don't have a
Violent people
monopoly.
condone violence. Is that the one you meant?
I think you said Muslims don't have a monopoly on violence. Was that the quote? The
Yes,
comment?
yes, that was all by Neutrino, including the quotes from Nietzsche.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay, so both by the same person. All right. So yeah, I appreciate people say that we don't have a monopoly on violence, and I do think there are people who are confused. There's a lot of there are Muslims who do get confused and do blow themselves up, and those are people who don't read the text and who are just very angry people, and also they don't seem to. Yeah, so I can't remember how many billion Muslims there are, 1.5 billion. So there are always going to be a few crazy ones, and
Yes.
I don't want to just be insulting. I actually love everybody, so I feel sorry for the people who blow themselves up, as well as the people they hurt as well.
Mhm.
I just feel, yeah, eventually there's going to be a
Troubled
percent.
people.
Exactly, you're going to have a percentage, right, who are
Mhm.
confused, and it's nothing to do with the teachings of Islam. Just to give you a quote, and these are so well-known quotes from the teachings of Islam, like there is no compulsion in matter of religion, so you cannot force people through bombings and violence to agree with you, because that will be compelling them, and that is against the basic teaching of Islam. So that's one quick thing there. And then the thing about Nietzsche's this, and I kind of learn sort of by proxy, which is, and the proxy being Jordan Peterson, sometimes, about people like Nietzsche, because I haven't read Nietzsche myself, but I understand from what Jordan Peterson says about this particular quote about, well, God is dead, but we won't be able to wipe the blood. I can't remember the exact, I'm paraphrasing from that, is that what's going to happen as a result of killing God, or basically disbelieving in God, okay, is massacres. Okay, because once you disbelieve in God, then nothing matters. There is no purpose, there's no point of anything, and even human life becomes irrelevant and pointless, and it doesn't matter if you kill anybody. And so the result of that is the greatest massacres of human history are through atheistic communist movements, Mao, Lenin, etc. Right? Because life doesn't matter anymore, because nothing matters anymore.
Because the ends justify the means, and they have no. That's what they think. I'm not agreeing with them, and they're basically saying, well, if it gets us the result we want, then it's all right. But somebody with religion will say, well, we're not permitted to do that, so we won't. Yeah. Even though it would get us what we want, stealing, killing.
Right. So the religious teaching that's common in famously common in Judaism and Islam, I think is famously common, is that if you save the life of one person, it's like saving the life of all of humanity. So it's a very different perspective, with the atheistic perspective where nothing matters, then you can kill 1 million people and it makes no difference. But with the religious perspective, even killing one person is like killing all of humanity. So like night and day perspective, very different perspective. And it's not for, just to maybe explain a little bit further, if you do want to make change, you don't have to do it by the wrong means, because it's God who makes the change. You're just a pawn on the chessboard. Your job is only to do the right thing, and God will create the change when enough people do the right thing. So we don't feel compelled to do the wrong thing, and that's because
you have boundaries.
We have boundaries, but also it's not us running the show. So the suicide bombers, or any extremist, even if they're religious or not, the fact that they think that they have to do something terrible to achieve some greater good means they don't realize or accept that there's an all-powerful God who is actually in charge. Does that make any sense? So I don't feel the need to blow up or do anything wrong, because I can see Islam is going to win. There are many prophecies
eventually.
It's been prophesied, and there are. I didn't get around to it, but I think I'll maybe mention. I don't know. When I start off with one topic, it can go off into many others, so I won't. But in short, God is not only in the Koran giving guidance, but has since regularly gives guidance, and there is already a very clear and powerful movement, which I haven't even talked to you about, in which the reform of society is on its way already, and no violence is necessary. But I will mention that another time. It seems to be a ton of things yet to explain, but any other comments?
Yes, and the last few comments are by Elliot Blatt, who says Buddhism at its core is rational. As such, it expects its adherents to be rational. I know Elliot Blatt is Buddhist, and he says about something you just said, this is not true. Poor people are nearly always miserable. And his final comment is, Islam is the youngest of all religions.
Sure. Okay, so let's Buddhism is rational. Okay, first of all, it's the most empty. I'm not trying to be insulting, but first of all, let's even rewind a bit more. The Buddhism that you think is Buddhism is not even what Buddha said, because what Buddha says is really so complicated. If you go to you can Google real quotes from Buddha, they're so complicated, it's a struggle to fully understand them. What you think, Mr. Black, or whatever your name was, sorry, I can't see usernames. What you think is Buddhism is actually just Westerners hijacking the religion of Buddha. So you will see some wonderful sounding quote that runs off the tongue. If it runs off the tongue really quickly, and it's not Buddhism. It's just a picture of Buddha in the background and a quote from a Westerner who's hijacked the religion.
Have
Okay.
you studied Buddhism?
I've studied it to some extent to find out the origins, and I can't remember the names exactly, but it starts off with a belief in God. It's fundamental. Even when I used to do live streams with a Buddhist monk, and he even told me the same, right? That Buddhists believe in a god. And when I've looked into the quotes of Buddha, they're very much in line with Islam. So there's no contradiction. And the reason why there's no contradiction, because in the Quran, as is logical, says God has always guided all of humanity. He didn't just pick Muslims, didn't just pick the Jews, but always guided all of humanity throughout time, sent messengers to all people at all times. So yeah. So I don't know if that explains anything, but yeah.
But I suppose he is entrusted. He could be said to have entrusted Jews and Muslims with scripture, his love letters that you were referring to. Was that what you were saying?
So what I'm saying is that what am I saying? I'm saying first of all that true Buddhism is Islam. So he probably doesn't know Buddhism if he differentiates one as being logical and the other not. What he thinks is Buddhism is just Westerners hijacking it. And then continuing, what the Westerners have taught is empty and selfish individualism, because it's topics like don't think of the future or the past, just be in the now. That's actually incredibly selfish and destructive teaching, and we can see it's a selfish and destructive teaching because out of all the world's religions, it is the only one, I think it's Pew Reports, or I can't remember which survey it was, it's the only one to be set to be extinct well before 2050. Okay, so you can see in Islam, it's growing the fastest. Why is it growing the fastest? Because it has values that are rational, that actually make sense in real life, which creates stable people, therefore stable families, and therefore stable communities, etc. Okay, whereas Buddhism has none of that. It's just nice sound bites which don't really work.
And a corrupt priesthood.
Yeah. So people, for example, we say what's it called, the paedophile priests. You also have paedophile monks, right?
And the recent thing that the Dalai Lama is in trouble for.
Oh,
do you know about that?
No, I don't know. What's the latest?
Well, I think he just forgot that he was on camera. But anyway, a young boy went to greet him, and he said, "Suck my tongue." That's the story.
Sure, and it doesn't surprise me, right? And why doesn't it surprise me? I'm just being logical, not even being mean. Okay, being celibate is not natural or healthy, and eventually you're going to have an outlook. And what happens is that why are there paedophile priests? Because they go after children because they're the easiest target to have sex with, hidden in a hidden way, right? So I'm not hating on anybody. I feel sorry. I don't know how to put it, like, because people might say I'm supporting paedophile priests. I feel sorry for these people who think celibacy is somehow helpful or holy. It's not. It's dangerous. And so the person who's supporting Buddhism, people who support Buddhism and say we're Buddhists, and I know many, their lives don't go well at all. Okay, Westerners go for Buddhism because it doesn't include God, and they hate God so much, right? At their own detriment, and so that's yeah. What are the comments? I could keep going on, but what was it? The Myanmar? There was the really violent Myanmar monks or something. The really violent Buddhists. So don't forget about them.
Yes, I mean, who are being mean to the Rohingyas, wasn't it? Those ones.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So there's no shortage of persecution from Buddhists, but it's just not shown on the media because media is biased. And why are they biased? Because I think very logically, the only thing that's standing up to the globalist elites is Islam, and they've got to, do their best to make us look bad. But the
Hmm.
Buddhists are fantastic for them because they just let people, as we were saying in our earlier videos, uh, Buddhism is a sort of like give up sort of philosophy. It's like, don't worry about anything, just give up. Don't worry about your feelings. Don't worry about it. It's not a practical religion, and you will lay down and take it all.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
It's a religion that's statistically set to die out, and that's what the elite wants. It's not a helpful religion. It sounds lovely, but it's not practical. Any other questions?
Yes. Yes, and I just wanted to mention that my mother thinks that the Dalai Lama is an American stooge. And liberals love Buddhism because they think it allows them to do what they want and then meditate every now and then to feel better about themselves, and they're happy and it's done the job. Mindfulness, they just mind about themselves, you know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And when the Dalai Lama says he doesn't know the answer to something, they say, "Oh, how enlightened, how open-minded." Like, that's not good. You don't know the answer. I'll tell you the answer. Don't worry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the final comment Elliot Batt makes is Islam is the youngest of all religions, making it, well,
The least intelligent child, right? Okay. So to give the Islamic perspective, it's the most evolved religion. Okay, so earlier religions said things like you can drink alcohol, and so as I said earlier on, God has been giving messages throughout time, right from the cavemen, right? But the cavemen didn't have much technology, they didn't have international relations or anything like that. And so they had the most rudimentary teachings, based on what they were capable of doing. They were just capable of killing things, whatever. They didn't even know what alcohol was. They probably couldn't even make it. Do you know what I mean? So as religion, as humanity developed, God taught more and more intricate teachings, like wear more clothes. Maybe cavemen couldn't even make clothes, right?
hmm
So it's the most advanced religion. So, for example, it's the only religion that says don't drink alcohol. And wow, like, don't isn't alc so if people don't know this, but or maybe people don't know this, but maybe there's somehow, actually I think most people don't know this, like in this country, 1/3 of accidents in accident and emergency, like the emergency ward basically, in hospitals is due to alcohol. Alcohol causes wife beatings, sexual abuse of children, so many other terrible things, and it's known by experts as a gateway drug to all other drugs, right? So there's so many massive problems, and Islam's the only religion that forbids it outright, right? So it seems to be the most advanced religion, and that's not a bad thing, I think. So I suppose that answers that question. Does it? I mean, do you feel it answers the question, or have I missed?
I certainly think so. And just to go back on to Buddhism, um, what I think is a problem with Buddhism is that I think it makes a point of not having too many rules, and also, to the extent that it is good, I guess it agrees with Islam, and because it has not that many rules about, always telling the truth and God knowing your mind, so don't even think about, trying to get away with it. Um, the prospect of just being reincarnated into a worse life form in your next life is probably not sufficiently terrifying to people inclined to criminality and lies.
Hmm.
And I think that might be its problem.
As usual, I could say 100 things on that. One would be just briefly. Um, Again, what people think is Buddhism is not Buddhism. It's just Westerners teaching you stuff on behalf of Buddha, and so that's why it doesn't have any rules, because Westerners don't want rules. They think freedom makes them happy, but it makes them miserable. And then the thing about reincarnation, that's sort of, let's say, Chinese whispers, where over the millennia it's been confused. All religions teach an idea of constant rebirth. So you've got the Christians who say you have to be born again Christian. What does born again mean? It doesn't mean you're literally born again. What it means is that you had to let go of your evil desires, and then when you let go of that, it feels like death. It does feel like death. And then because you hope that, would you agree? Like you might have certain...
You turn over a new leaf. Is that really what you mean? Like,
yeah, but it does. I think practically the reason why people don't change or let go of their egotistical desires, because it's so painful, and it does actually feel like death, because you think life will not continue if I don't let go of that thing. So you might feel the need to have a really expensive car because you feel like you'll never be loved again if you let go of that expensive car. But that, when you let go of it, then you've reborn into a new experience within life, and you realize you're free from the need to buy stupid things that don't make you actually endearing to other people. Mostly if you're driving in a Lamborghini, people probably people are laughing at you. It's like, why are you in such a ridiculous car? So things like that. So in Islam, you're expected to go through a death of your ego continuously, and every time you do that, you let go of a sin, let's say, it feels really painful, but you come out the other side a more free and happier person.
yes.
So the idea of reincarnation is just a misunderstanding over the millennia. It's actually the same idea in all religions about death and rebirth in this life.
Yes. I wanted to ask you your opinion on the question of turning over a new leaf, because I know somebody who has converted to Orthodox Judaism, and he was a director of porn, and you think, okay, we are all sinners, and we all have a wicked past, and anybody can point out to lower us in status, and so if you were a former criminal, you wouldn't be saying, in the good old days when I was a burglar, or in the good old days when I was a director of porn. Not after your conversion, not after you say, well, I'm really sorry about, all the bad things I've done in the past, and I've converted to Islam, Judaism, or whatever it is that was a formal, line that you drew under your wicked past, that you hope to draw a line under, but you don't keep saying, oh, in the good old days when I was, a pirate, a robber, a bandit, a highwayman, I did such and such a thing, and showing obvious signs of, wishing that they were doing it again.
So when you say turning over a new leaf, what are you saying as part of turning over a new leaf is to forget your past and don't talk about it? Is that the question, that you should not talk about your past or something?
Well, I think sometimes when people talk about their past, it is really to remember the pleasure of what it was. Obviously, we shouldn't deny it and say, hey, weren't you a convicted prisoner who spent time inside, and it's not up to you to say, no, it wasn't true, or I didn't do it. If you did do it, you'd have to say, yes, and I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't have done it, but I'm a reformed criminal now. But if you keep saying, it was fun when I was doing it, and when you're talking about it in a way that suggests, more than a hint of nostalgia, it does suggest that you're not truly remorseful, and that you are really, in a way, trying to revive those memories, or maybe show off your sexual conquests, when you talk about all the women you had sex with, and, even if it didn't work out, you're kind of, in a way, boasting.
Right, okay. So the way I see that is that I recommend and I encourage people to fully understand the harm they're doing to themselves by doing things that are considered sin. Not just, it sounds like from the way you're describing it, these people haven't fully understood how much harm they're doing to themselves, and they just done it for some other reason, to sound like some sort of, they see religion as a ritual of rights and wrongs.
As a way of gaining status.
Okay, sure. And that's the wrong, that's not going to benefit you in the long term if you still think the things you used to do were actually enjoyable. And what I would like to say is that any bad thing is actually bad for you. So that's what the Quran says, that I made this thing a sin because it's bad for you, and I made this thing a righteous deed because it's good for you. It's not arbitrary. So whenever you listen, you do it for the good of your own soul. Another verse of the Holy Quran. So people should understand the spirit, and that they should deeply understand why, and that's the only valuable way of turning over a new leaf. If you don't, then you can easily fall back on your old mistakes. If you thought that was a better way of life, of being a porn director, for example. And that's a discussion to be had, like each individual sin. You want to say, what's wrong with being a porn director? And then, if you know anything about the sex industry, it's an industry full of people who are really miserable, and people who are abused and taken advantage of. And just because you see happy smiley faces on the video, because they have to, it doesn't mean it's reality. So,
But you wouldn't want to marry a porn actress, and you wouldn't want to, if you had a daughter, for her to go into that industry. But it seems to be glamorized. I think they have their own version of the Academy Awards or something. But I suppose I am reluctant to. Okay, I accept that there are certain things that we know we shouldn't do, but that we still want to do, and I think sorry to be Jewish again, but it's called the evil inclination. The Jews call it the Yetzer Hara, that we know the good, but we choose the evil because we are attracted to it, because we have the urge to do it. And I think these laws are, intended to give us a moderate, what's the word, to regulate our consumption of whatever it is, because sex with spouses allowed, sex with non-spouses not allowed. So while we have sexual urges, obviously it's not a good idea to go around having random sex with people who are not married to us. But if we jump through enough hoops, we will find ourselves a spouse with whom to have sex with, and therefore our appetites are satisfied, but within the permitted way. And this, I think, is the reason for these rules. And food is good and necessary for us to live, but we shouldn't stray over into gluttony. And while leisure is good, we shouldn't stray over into sloth and that sort of idea, those 7 deadly sins, that sort of thing. But back to the topic that we were talking about whether God being alive. I suppose this is a bit a conceit, but I think it is possible that God can, maybe leave the building for a bit, perhaps intending to come back beyond, because he has created a universe in which the sin is its own punishment. So he's left instructions, and we break these rules at our own peril. And even if we do not suffer immediately, we might later, in this life or the next, or our group, our nation, our countrymen will suffer terrible things if we started believing in Christianity and refusing to change it because we're too proud to admit that our ancestors were wrong.
Okay, so the way I would say God is very carefully watching everything that happens, and I'm going to kind of give evidence. So I think we should, although I absolutely love this conversation, but I think there should be some time limit. And we haven't even got to the second conversation about how the revolution for a better world and all the problems we're
The
suffering.
social and psychological transformation.
We haven't even started on that. So I'm going to answer your question with the aim of finishing at, oh, we can't finish at 2, but we'll try. Maybe 2:01. And it goes something like this. And I'm gonna sort of open Pandora's box by ending it with this, right? So Muslims are all waiting for somebody called the Guided One, the Mahdi. I don't know, have you ever heard of that phrase, the Mahdi?
The Mahdi is supposed to come end times.
Right, okay, so that understanding is incorrect because we're already in the end times. The end time, and it wouldn't. There's a lot that the Muslims are confused with, the majority of the Muslims, and there's even the Quran says don't follow the majority, otherwise you'll be led astray from the way of God. That's the verse of the Holy Quran. And so the Mahdi, I'll end it with this, and it will be a massive Pandora's box. But here we go. God has promised in the latter days, which we're in right now, that he would send the Mahdi, the Guided One, and as well as the second coming of Jesus, a whole different story, to guide people. And so he said, and I'll just quote this, he said, our Mahdi will have 2 signs which have never appeared since the heavens and the earth were created. The moon will be eclipsed on the first night of Ramadan, and the sun will be eclipsed halfway through. That's a rough translation. I copied it, pasted it from not the best source. In the middle of the days of which it can be, it should have said, the middle of the days in which it can be eclipsed. And this had never happened since Allah created the heavens and the earth, as a sign, that is, right? That prophecy has happened. It happened about 100 years ago. And there are many other prophecies that are continuously being fulfilled, meaning, and that I am part of that community of the followers of the Mahdi, and these are this prophecy is accepted by all the people who do not accept the Mahdi, but they just say it's a false prophecy, as in created by a human being. And the reason why that doesn't make sense is, why would God, the all-powerful, knowing, have the wrong person fulfill a prophecy that's made up by a human being? God would have stopped that if he's all-powerful or knowledgeable. So what I mean to say is, this prophecy and many other prophecies which I talk about at Speaker's Corner with other Muslims, and they can't argue against it, and it's all on my channel, demonstrates what? It demonstrates that God is sending people still, guiding people still, is very much interested in the affairs of humanity. It always prophesied that this would happen. The big mistake of Muslims at the moment, who have gone far away, even though they're doing much better than the rest of humanity, is they think, for example, the Mahdi would come literally on the last day, the last minute, before all of humanity was supposed to fall apart, and say, all of you become Muslim, and then God just destroys and finishes everything, which makes zero sense. It makes more sense that God guides people in the last phase of humanity, so you can actually benefit from being Muslim when all of the world becomes Muslim. And so I'm part of that community which is destined to create the revolution. And maybe you would talk more about that.
Great. I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I love being on your show. Thank you.
Okay. Speak to you soon. Thank you. Bye.